Welcome back with the next session here in Digital Life Academy studio with in Milan. I would like to introduce Guy Morbeck from Kindbody, the CSO there, and he's going to talk to us about oil in the IVF culture system. Thank you, Guy.
All right, can you hear me? There we go. Great. I think I'm actually on this side. Does this work?
Yeah.
Because I can see it better and look at you guys. So let's turn this on. Okay, so why do we use oil in IVF? And we all just use it and don't think twice, but there's really good reasons. It's for protection for embryos. Clearly, we want to minimize evaporation, stabilize pH and temperature when we move embryos or the dishes out of the incubator. And it obviously allows us to culture in small volumes, which we found beneficial. So obviously it makes it easier to find embryos. There's the paraffin effects of group culture. There's time lapse, ability to use time lapse, and we have to use this media. So we're getting pretty loud outside. Challenges. So what factors influence which oil you use? So there are things that probably influence why you choose different oils. One is the name. It's paraffin versus mineral oil versus synthetic. Now, it should be clear, hopefully by now, if you've read much of the oil literature, that paraffin and mineral oil are the same. Synthetic is actually different, so I'll describe that. But then we have heavy versus light. We may prefer to use light oil because it's maybe easier for you to work with in one way, or you may prefer heavy oil. The supplier influences it, the cost, the amount of quality testing that's performed, which is obviously quite enhanced in the past 10 years. There's been a lot more attention brought to oil to make sure that it's tested thoroughly, and it's always important to look at how much it's done and whether peroxides are present is something that we're always concerned with, whether it's measured directly or measured indirectly through other types of testing. So this slide has only one side to it, so we'll see what's coming up next. Yes, let me start here. So you may wonder, if you're new to the field, why worry about oil? Well, there's been a number of cases of lots of oil that are embryotoxic that passed all the testing and still ended up being toxic for patients. And I used here. This was the first report. Now, it wasn't a published study per se, but it was where Tom Turner talked about a bad lot of oil that affected blastocyst development. And then there's this paper, and that was now 12 years ago, and you might think that it's no longer a problem, and we've seen that the way oils are screened has minimized it to the point where hopefully it isn't a problem. And yet this paper, that was a really excellent paper out of the 𝗀𝘃𝗃 and 𝘀𝘆𝘀𝗃 group, looked at characterization of oils, and this is the most blastocyst rate for oils that are actually on the market, and there was one here that did not pass. And I'll be coming back to this. The red column is actually sigma mineral oil, which is not designed for use for human IVF. It's for control, but there was a lot here and not a lot here, so it suggests that there could still be some toxicity out there, so it's important to pay attention to it. Why is it difficult to test? Well, oil is very complex. It's got these things called paraffins, which are alkanes. There's no double bonds. Or there's olefins, which are alkenes. They can have double bonds in this long hydrocarbon. They also have naphthalene, and then these buggers, which are aromatics, PAHs, which are very reactive, and we don't want PAHs, so we definitely screen against those. But the mix of this is hard to test. It's actually, oil is really, really difficult to test. I did some work in the past 10 years with a researcher at Strathclyde where we used GCMS. And you can see here 6 different oils, very different characteristic humps of the way the oil looks. The problem with oil is that because the molecules are so similar, you can't take it and put it through a column and say, okay, we're only going to get the 10 carbon molecules and then the 12 carbon molecules. You can't separate them. This is called an unresolvable hump. Each one of these is impossible to discern what might be in there. So there's a question of oxidative stability And so oil can oxidize. That's why you keep it in the refrigerator in the dark. That's why we try to minimize how much we're exposing it to conditions that can result in oxidation. The oxidation stability of different oils, most of the ones on the market are hydro-treated mineral oil, where it means that all those double bonds, if you hit it hard with hydrogen, you turn them into single bonds, so you have fewer double bonds and less reactivity. That's most of what our oil is. And then there's this PAO oil up here at the top, the synthetic, which is using small building blocks of oil, still from petroleum, but now making oil from those small building blocks. And that's the most stable of the group, that one there. And then moving into ones that aren't from petroleum per se. So oil heavy is the only oil on the market that is a PAO. And it's more inert with fewer short and volatile carbon chains, so you can see quite a difference here in the profile. Although we have more resolution, that's good. Still an unresolved hump, so we're not like completely out of the woods with this oil, but it's taking a step in the right direction to say better quality oil, more stable, won't oxidize as readily. If we look at what other factors we look at with oil, again back to this paper by 𝗚𝘚 you can see that they tested the 𝘚 oil and another 12 oils. They looked at viscosity, density, and then you see over here they listed the oils as heavy, 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 medium viscosity, heavy, and then light oils. So we'll just talk in general about heavy versus light and what might be beneficial, what do we want to consider. Well, one is pH equilibration. How long does it take? And you would imagine, it's just intuitive to say, heavy oil, thicker, more viscous, it's going to take longer for oxygen to permeate, CO2 to permeate, and indeed it does. You can see that the red line there, the heavier oils are all up here. They take longer to equilibrate. So it takes somewhere between, to get to 7.4, between 2.5 on the light oil to up to 6 hours. And that's just 7.4, and you may culture further than that. So again, we know that that's why we always allow the media to equilibrate at least 4 to 6 hours before we're going to use it. With heavy oils, that's definitely important. And yeah, I think that's it for that. When you take a dish out of the incubator, the pH will rise, and this really nicely shows that at 0 hours are all at 7.25, say, or 7.28, and then they start to go up after 15 minutes. The lighter oils are all higher than these heavy oils. So that means that the heavy oil actually is minimizing pH fluctuation. For some reason, we don't know why, that 𝘚 oil, which is heavy, doesn't minimize that. It's kind of bizarre. Another one is temperature maintenance. So you take the dish out of and this shows the cooling rate during the first 5 minutes. How much does it drop in 5 minutes? That's per minute. And you see that the heavy oils, in general, are holding temperature a little better than the light oils, but it's not as significant of a difference as was for pH. So in summary, for oil quality, we want oil that lacks toxicity. Obviously, that's a given, and we need that. And we know that manufacturers go to great lengths to make sure it's not toxic, because it can be very catastrophic, and clearly we don't want that impact on our patients. The other characteristics that matter are how well it controls pH, temperature, and osmolality, and then the handling properties. One problem with light oil is if you handle it roughly, you could have the oil slide and actually seal the dish by getting to the lid. Less likely with heavy oil. Good practice, probably not going to happen with either, but still something that to consider. I didn't talk at all about osmolality here. That's a whole other story. I'm talking about dry culture versus humid culture, and heavy oil does reduce the amount of evaporation as well, so it's another consideration. Whether that small change in osmolality over time is actually impactful is unknown, and I would say is unlikely to be an issue. But if you're concerned with it, heavy oil will reduce it. All right, I think that's it. Any questions?